Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. I'm back, number one. I had a little break for the holidays. We're approaching the end of the year, so I wanted to do a weekend show to catch up on the holiday stuff that has been happening. Wow, there's been a lot of movies that have come out that I've not even touched upon yet. So this one's going to be a little bit of an improv episode. I'm just going to have to dive through the top 10 for this weekend and then expand on each one of these newer films just to see how they're doing overall. I'm not sure if I'm going to have time to get to the limited releases and talk about the award stuff, but I will talk a little bit about what's going to be coming up in the next few weeks at the box office. It is such a weird time to cover the box office because I feel like the holidays, it's like anything past Thanksgiving, you take the rule book that you have for the other 11 months of the year and you just completely throw it out the window. In terms of like multipliers and opening weekends, nothing really makes sense during the holidays just because culturally our daily patterns change so much. We're on vacation, we're seeing movies during the week with our family. People are off of college. It just gets super weird. And it's actually a ton of fun to dive into this stuff just because we will get crazy stories like Jumanji last year and Greatest Showman, where films open to like $12 million or like $30 million and they end up making well over 150 with like a 9x, 10x multiplier. So it's going to be a really fun time to follow the box office for the next couple of months. And so what we're going to do today, I'm going to dive into the top 10 for this weekend, which is December 28th through the 30th. But I'm going to do deeper dives on each one of these wider releases because I haven't touched upon Aquaman, Mary Poppins, Bumblebee, and on and on. I haven't talked about them at all because I've been off for the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to sort of do the deep dive on those films, and then we'll sort of take a look at everything and see how everything's doing at the box office, and then maybe close up the year a little bit. I plan on doing a year-end show, hopefully. My new job is very, very tough, and I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to try and do a year-end show maybe around the middle of this week. We'll see. So let's dive right into the top 10 and start talking about what's going on at the holiday box office. So number one for this weekend is Aquaman. It is its second weekend. It did $51.5 million for the weekend, which is a fantastic 23% drop. Now, normally if you have a drop like that, that's outrageous and insane, but it is the holidays. And so the drops are different. The weekend versus the weekday is totally different. But that is still a fantastic drop for Aquaman. It currently sits at $188 million here domestically. Worldwide, overall take is $750 million. So this one, I love to contextualize things. I just don't want to talk about a movie. Oh, it's Aquaman. This is what it does, and that's it. So this is DCEU. This is like the follow-up to, if you think about DCEU, you have the Superman movies. Batman vs. Superman, universally despised as a terrible movie. I think it's the worst movie I've seen as a major blockbuster that's been released in the last decade. It's just absolutely awful. You had Justice League falling apart and collapsing. So the DCEU has had a rough go of it, but they've had some good successes. Suicide Squad, despite the fact that it's not a great movie, did pretty well. It made $325 million just domestically back in 2016. Wonder Woman is sort of the crown jewel of the DCEU universe. DCEU universe, I love it. Two universes, apparently. Wonder Woman did 412 domestically, which is an outrageous total. Totally surprised everybody. A big win for DC. So Aquaman was sort of like, which path is this going to take? Is this going to take the Justice League, Batman versus Superman, where the quality's not very good and it's not going to perform up to expectations? Is that going to happen? Or is it going to take more of a Wonder Woman path where it's very successful? So right now it's sitting at 188 domestically, 750 worldwide. That I would say is very good for this film. Keep in mind, Aquaman is not like a Wonder Woman or a Batman or a Superman. It's not necessarily in that top tier of superhero in terms of recognition. So the fact that this is now it's pulling ahead of Justice League by about 10% at this point in its release history. So it's ahead of Justice League by 10%. ahead of Doctor Strange by 24%. That's actually more of a good comparison to me, because Justice League was such a weird situation with the production. It was like there's a lot of hype, but then there was also this real anxiety about the release because everybody kind of knew it wasn't going to be great. So Doctor Strange seems to be a little bit more apt. We were kind of deeper in the universe, sort of canon, not a top shelf character necessarily. And so I think the fact that it's 24% ahead of Doctor Strange at the same point in their releases is a really good sign. 7% ahead of Guardians of the Galaxy. And it's only about 8% behind Wonder Woman. So, I'm looking at these numbers, and I have to say right now it's a really big win for DCEU. And the way that it's just been playing during the weekdays, it's strong. It's a very strong release. It's winning the holidays, which I didn't think it was going to do. I had thought that, and we'll get to Mary Poppins in a second, I had thought that Mary Poppins was going to crush everything the last 2 weeks of the year, but that has not happened. And so Aquaman is definitely the winner right now. Where is this thing going to end up? It's almost impossible to tell because of the holiday chaos. The multipliers are all screwed up. If you just take a baseline look at it, it opened up at 67 on the weekend of the 21st to the 23rd. Open at 67. You're looking at what? 201 obviously would be a 3x multiplier. Well, it's already at 188, so it's going to blast through a 3x multiplier. Again, see, this is why it's strange. Like if this had opened up in August or something like that, I would say a 3x would be good for a comic book movie. But because it's during the holidays, it's going to run and run and run, and it's doing quite well. That 23% drop this weekend is fantastic. I would say that for this one, you're probably looking at what, a 3.5x multi, which is 234. That seems easily doable. It made 67 opening weekend, 51 its second weekend, with a lot of money in between. So I think a 3.5x multiplier is totally doable. Maybe even a 4x multiplier, which would put it at what? 268. That also seems doable to me. This is a big win in a lot of different ways. One, it puts DCEU back on track and shows that if you give a good director, James Wan, who's famous from The Conjuring and sort of horror stuff, and did he do Saw? He may have done Saw. I think he was at least affiliated with it. Did one of the Furious movies, so he kind of is working his way up in terms of the totem pole of doing bigger and bigger films. And so he's proved himself here that he can make a movie that, critically is not loved, right? 64% Rotten Tomatoes from the critics, 81% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, grain of salt always. But the A- cinema score is a good sign. He made a decent comic book movie that people enjoy. So it puts DCEU back on track. It's okay, after Justice League, I think everybody was sort of where is this going? The whole universe needs to be rebooted or just gutted, and they just need to start over. Wonder Woman has created, I think, the blueprint for the universe, where it's you take one character, you make a really good, interesting movie, and then eventually, maybe 4 or 5 years from now, you think about a bigger ensemble movie. That's what MCU did, and it worked out really well. And so I think DC has added another potential character, or another character sort of, it's not even necessarily another character. It's another, a beam of foundation. If you're building a house, you have a few foundations that create, a few beams that create the foundation. I think Wonder Woman was one beam, and Aquaman's the other. You probably need at least 2 more really strong character-driven, well-done movies that do well with the public in order to create a bigger universe ensemble movie like a Justice League should have been. And now I think Aquaman is that. You have Wonder Woman, you have Aquaman, you need a couple more, and then they can start thinking about doing one of those bigger Avengers-like movies. So, great performance so far from Aquaman. In terms of who's seeing this movie, it's your typical audience. Deadline likes to point out that women over 25 are a big chunk here, and they're showing up because of Jason. How do you say his name? Momoa? I'm not going to try it. The lead character. And so they're showing up, giving Aquaman its best gender score of 84%. I don't even know what that means. Deadline sometimes throws out numbers without context. It's who knows what that means? I'm not looking at the data set, so I don't know what that means. Moms are outnumbering dads in attendance 52 to 48%. Again, throwaway metric. Blah, 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 blah. Families are repping close a third of the crowd. Guys under 25 make up the biggest portion of the moviegoers at 31%. So that's the headline. They throw out all these numbers, but the real story there is that men under 25 are pushing this movie over the top. Right. And that totally makes sense. You have to win over males under 25 for a comic book movie to do very, very well. And so that's the story on that. We'll keep an eye on Aquaman. I don't know where it's going to go over the next few weeks. I honestly couldn't even tell you. It's going to have a bigger drop than 23% next weekend. It's going to have a pretty massive drop, I would say. Because this drop is so low, I would say probably about a 50% drop, if not higher, maybe 60% drop next weekend. It doesn't seem like it's going to copy Wonder Woman, where, remember, that was released in the summer. And that one, the word of mouth on Wonder Woman came after the movie came out. There certainly was a lot of hype before, but it wasn't anywhere near the hype 2 weeks after its release. I don't think Aquaman's going to be the same, just because it just doesn't have the cultural touchstones or whatever, the cultural sort of hype that Wonder Woman did. Think about the Me Too movement happening kind of at the same time, concurrently. Aquaman doesn't have that, right? It doesn't have that sort of additional boost. So I do think it's going to drop pretty heavily next weekend. But I think it's going to cruise to 230, 250, no problem whatsoever. And I think worldwide is going to do quite well. Okay, so that's Aquaman, number one, 51.5 million. Baseball metaphor, it's a triple, maybe even a home run for Warner Brothers on that one. Less of a home run is number two, Mary Poppins Returns. Okay, it's sitting at $28 million in its second weekend. That's actually a 19% increase from its opening weekend. So right now, Mary Poppins Returns, by the end of its second weekend here, is sitting at $98.9 million, essentially $100 million domestically, $173 million worldwide. Now, this is a very interesting story to me, because if you have followed this podcast, you know that I have been a huge sort of backer of this film doing well. To me, it was going to be the breakout movie of the holiday season. And I have to sort of look up my numbers here and see what I had predicted for it. I just felt like it was going to be easily $300 million domestically, maybe even $400 million domestically. And it was just going to crush all the competition, and it was going to play strong all the way through Valentine's Day. That's still, the playing strong through Valentine's Day, I think it's still a possibility, but it's not going to make $400 million domestically. And it's probably not going to come close to $300 million domestically. And that sucks. And so what happened there? Why was I so wrong? If I'm looking at my prediction, I said $300 million total domestically for this one. It might still leg it there. But what happened here is it just didn't pop off, pun always intended. It just didn't pop off immediately. And I think that is one of the reasons why it feels pretty underwhelming. Its opening weekend was only $23 million. Now, that's not that low compared to other December musicals. I'm looking at Into the Woods was $31 million back in 2015. Les Mis was $27 million back in 2012. So it's above those, and it's playing, if you do like the Box Office Mojo does a little showdown per daily, what it's doing, it's ahead of most of those films. It's in its 12th day of release. It's kind of even with Les Mis. It's ahead of Into the Woods. And so it's playing pretty well compared to a December musical, but it's not necessarily playing strong to the expectations that people thought. Les Mis only did 148 total. Into the Woods only did 128 total. Greatest Showman, I think, is the real horse race that it's playing against. That did 174. But Greatest Showman opened up at $8 million its opening weekend. It was considered a flop its opening. I called it a flop the opening weekend. And then it just never went away, ever. That thing closed out. The closing date for The Greatest Showman, it opened on December 20th, 2017 last year. It officially closed out July 26th this summer. It played for 219 days, 31 weeks. The other December musicals played for about 3 months, which is longer than a normal film. A normal film only plays about a couple of months tops. And so musicals are just, they're special. They have a totally different trajectory when you talk about box office. So Mary Poppins, while it's not meeting, I think, my expectations and a lot of industry insiders' expectations, the expectation here was that this thing would cruise to 300 and maybe on higher, and maybe even 400 or the $500 million that Beauty and the Beast did. Like, those were all thoughts in our heads. That's not going to happen. And so Deadline, the big question is, okay, so in terms of metaphors, Mary Poppins was expected to be a home run, and it's looking more like a slide into second for a double, or maybe even a single, because they did spend a lot of money on this movie. It wasn't cheap. I think production budget was $130 on this. Something like that. It was over $100 million just for the production budget. Marketing was massive. You're talking at least $120 million worldwide to market this thing. So there's a lot of costs associated with it. But I do think that the downstream revenue, the VOD, the digital sales, the streaming, it's going to help boost Disney's streaming service, which I think starts later next year. So I don't think it's going to be a loss in terms of business, in terms of profit, but it's certainly underperforming what a lot of people thought, and a lot of educated people inside the industry thought it was going to do. And so it's a little bit of a kind of, it's an underwhelming performance by Mary Poppins. I saw this movie with my family. I was really excited to see it. It's good. It's very trippy. I forgot how trippy the original one was, but this was sort of follows suit. Very kind of crazy. Dick Van Dyke shows up at the end in a wonderful sequence. It's a really interesting, well-made film. Is it a masterpiece? Absolutely not. Is it really? It's just like a really fun musical film, perfect for the holidays, which is why I thought it would do so well. 78% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's getting brigaded a little bit by trolls on Rotten Tomatoes. 69% audience score because Emily Blunt said something bad about Trump once, so his cult members are attacking the film. Cinema score of A-. That's a little bit more accurate, I think, of the audience. I think one of the big things that popped up that I had not realized was that it doesn't have any of the original songs from the first movie in there. And I think there was an expectation that there would be more continuity between the original film and this one, but this is more of like a reboot, not really a sequel situation. So a lot of the songs aren't in this film. Deadline quotes some rivals at different studios saying the film's too British, it's too white. They should have focused more on Lin-Manuel Miranda and that character, which he doesn't really. He plays a decently strong character in the film, but he kind of disappears for a while. The focus is Emily Blunt, is the very white, very British family. I don't really think that that's a fair criticism at all. Like, it's just like that's what the movie's about. Like, I don't know. I don't think they should just be throwing in random non-white characters to get more of an audience. Like, that doesn't really hold a lot of water in terms of a criticism here. I think it's going to play decently well for a while. Where do I think it's going to end up? It's at $100 million right now. I would say probably like an 8x multiplier. And that's why you never hear me say an 8x multiplier, right? You hear me say like 2.5x, 3, 4x tops. Holidays obviously is different. So 8x multiplier, I mean, what would that put that at? It opened at 23. That would be a 184. That seems pretty doable. I think here's how I'm going to mark the success of this film. If it beats Greatest Showman, I think it's a win. Greatest Showman was 174. It cost a ton more money than Greatest Showman, but I think like that's the barometer to me. It's got to get over that 124 mark. If it hits $200 million, I think that's really good. But it's never going to come close to the expectations that I think a lot of people had for this film, and it happens. Now, I haven't really talked about why it happened. Why is it not hitting the expectations of what Disney had thought, what I had thought, what a lot of industry insiders had thought? I do think that's the only place where I think that too British, too white criticism kind of makes sense. It didn't really, and I have not seen the cinema or post-track audience breakdowns yet, but my sense is that it's over-indexing on white audiences and over-indexing on over 25s. And so it didn't really, I don't think, connect with younger people under 25, and different groups like African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and everybody else. I don't know if it connected well, but I haven't seen the data to back that up, so I can't really throw that out as like a weakness. It just didn't spark for whatever reason. It didn't spark with audiences in the way that I thought it was going to. And I'm talking about like a Beauty and the Beast hype level. Beauty and the Beast, the remake, isn't very good. Like, it's not a good movie, but it made $500 million domestically. So it's one of those things where it's like not really sure why this thing isn't doing well. If I had to like guess, I would say that a lot of the criticisms that I heard from people, 3 months out, 6 months out before this was getting released, a lot of the criticisms were, hey, nobody knows who Mary Poppins is besides old people. And I think that's after seeing this performance, I kind of see that. Before I was totally blind. I was like, you guys are nuts. Everyone knows who Mary Poppins is. Everybody loves Mary Poppins. This is going to be huge. It's going to follow suit with all the Disney remakes. We have Aladdin coming. We have Lion King coming. Those are going to be massive. And this is going to sort of follow in those footsteps. It's like Disney is ascendant. It's never been stronger than it is right now. They're going to put this thing out. And it's going to print money. That didn't happen. And so I think that it didn't happen because the Mary Poppins IP is not as strong as I thought it was. And that's me being probably biased as a white male who grew up in like a more affluent area with some British heritage. Like, that's probably my bias speaking through, because Mary Poppins is always like a huge institution in my world, and then like it was really like a cultural touchstone, and maybe it's not like that for a lot of other people in the United States and maybe even worldwide. So I think that's probably the weakness here. I'm kind of showing my cultural bias with thinking Mary Poppins is going to be this massive, huge event film for everybody. In any event, so that's where Mary Poppins is right now. A 19% jump from last weekend. I don't know where it's going to go, but I do think that 150 is going to be easy. 180, I think, is going to be easily doable. And I think 200 is probably where it's going to cap out at. But we're going to be watching that one pretty closely. Let's keep this train rolling. Let's go to Bumblebee. Came in at number 3 this weekend. $20 million, 5% drop. It's made it's only made $66 million. So far in its second weekend. I wonder if they do a showdown on this one just to compare it to other Transformers films. Okay, obviously it has the lowest opening of any Transformers film. The last Transformers movie was The Last Night, which came out in June of 2017. That opened to 44, closed out at 130. Pretty much a disaster for the series, and sort of one of the reasons why I think Bumblebee was happening. And why they put some money behind it, because they needed to reboot the entire Transformers cinematic universe. And this is like them stepping outside their norm and saying, hey, let's do this other film. Obviously, it was greenlit before Last Night came out, but I think they're putting a lot of their eggs in this basket to see if it does well, as another way to keep the Transformers universe going, but sort of approaching it from maybe an asymmetrical sort of narrative angle. How is Bumblebee doing? $130 million production budget. It's made 66 so far. It's doing okay. You can't argue with the quality of the film, right? 93% in Rotten Tomatoes. That's outstanding for a lot of reasons. One, Transformers is like a dartboard for film critics. It's like anti-cinema. It's Michael Bay. It's over the top. It's really shitty storytelling, really shitty writing, really fun movies though. But they score like 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. Film critics hate them. The fact that film critics love Bumblebee is one of the most surprising things I've seen the entire year, hands down. So they put it in good hands, a good lead, and I think 80% audience score, A- cinema score. So the quality is there. Is what I'm trying to say. There is a real distinct high quality to this movie. 4.5 stars on Post Track, which is very good. I think, and Deadline brings this up as a point. Well, they don't bring it up as a point. They source this from other rivals in the film industry, basically saying this movie's getting buried by the schedule. It got slotted in here at the end of the year. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's just getting buried by the other movies that are coming out. There's too much out. I tend to agree with that statement. I think this would have been better as like a early August, mid-August release. Give it some breathing room and it would find its audience. It still might find its audience. It had a super low drop in its second weekend, but it started out way too low. And the trajectory for this one is, opened at 21, which is super depressed. I'm going to say it's probably going to do 5x multiplier. So maybe like 105. That's just not good enough for a movie like this. It's not. That they spent way too much money on the production budget. It's not a massive flop, but it's just like 135 on production, at least $100 million to market this worldwide. Maybe they focused more just on the domestic market. So 50, 60 million bucks domestic. You're talking just baseline to release this film, $230 million at least. Making $100 million bucks domestically, it's just not going to do it. And worldwide, I think it still has a lot of places to open up. It's only done 156 worldwide. I think they did a lot of things right here. Haley Steinfeld as the lead is a great choice. John Cena also in this. Travis Knight did a wonderful job with direction. So even from a product conception, from a product quality perspective, it's a huge win for Paramount. From a product conception standpoint, it's kind of like a mixed bag. This is sort of to take the Transformers universe in a different direction. I think that sort of works. I think if you match that with the quality, it's a really good movie. This is like the Batman Begins of the reboots here, where we're going to get a really amazing Transformers universe movie in the next couple of years based on this one. That's possible. So product conception kind of feels a little bit a gray area. Marketing seemed really strong. This thing was everywhere. I saw ads for it on everything. It was just massive and huge. And the quality of the marketing was okay. The thing is, you didn't really know it was a Transformers movie unless you kind of followed the news about it, because they kind of like set it up as a non-Transformers movie. They don't come out and say, from the producer of Transformers, Michael Bay, blah, blah. They don't really oversell the Transformers angle. I thought that was a little bit of a mistake, because if you want to get people to show up and you want to have that blockbuster hype, I would have mentioned that a lot more with this movie. And why not? I mean, you're just building on that audience that is already out there for those films. So I think it's an okay performance. It's really kind of one of those films where we're not going to know what its real impact was until like 2 or 3 years from now. Because if Transformers ends with this and that's it, it's kind of a failure. But if they use this as a launching pad to shift the narrative direction of the Transformers universe and create some really amazing movies that aren't just trash like the previous movies were, I think it's a big win, right? So we don't really know yet. It's not performing. I do know this. It's not performing super well. Compared to the production budget and marketing costs, it's probably not going to make a lot of money. It's definitely break even, if not a loss territory. But it might pay dividends down the line because it's such a high quality film. But that was number 3 this weekend, $20 million. Bumblebee, we'll keep an eye on that one. Number 4, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, increased 11% this weekend, $18 million. Total take so far for Spider-Man is $103 million domestically. Let's see what it's doing worldwide here. 213 worldwide. This is an interesting movie. So it opened at 35. I haven't followed this one all that closely, to be honest. Opened at 35. Its second weekend, it dropped 53%, which is high. But it's a comic book movie and a lot of fanboys involved, so it's going to be front loaded. But still, we're on the holiday season. You shouldn't be dropping that much in your second weekend if you're opening the last 2 weeks of the year. That's a high drop. Its 11% increase is great this weekend, but not, that drop is just way too heavy in the second weekend. So it's at 103, cost $90 million to make. Overall costs for this thing are probably in the $250 million mark. Just like total releasing costs on all platforms over the next year, it'll probably cost about $250 million to release on all those platforms worldwide. So, I'm trying to think, like, is this thing going to make a lot of money? Like, what are we looking at? It's at 213. So let's just assume it costs 250 to make everything, to release it all. It's probably only going to take in about 85. I would say it needs to make about 300 million worldwide to be profit break even. Is it going to make that? Right now, it looks like it might struggle to make that. I haven't seen where else it needs to open yet, though. Oh, it has opened in a lot of places. Doing well in China, 26 million in China. Where else is doing okay? Russia is doing about 4 million. South Korea, 4 million. United Kingdom, 5.2 million. So when this thing popped off opening weekend, I thought the opening week was going to be a lot higher than $35 million. The story on this is it's a very high quality film. It's almost just like Bumblebee. Super high quality film. People really love it. They're gushing about it online. 97% Rotten Tomatoes from critics. 97 for an animated Spider-Man film. 97%. 94% audience score. It's super strong. Like, that's just it's a very high quality product. Opening in a little bit of a weird spot, I would say, at the end of the year. Like Bumblebee, I think there's a lot of static and a lot of other movies opening, so it's getting a little bit lost. The problem that I always had with this Spider-Man animated movie was, why do we need it? And I'm not saying that sort of to be dismissive about comic book movies or the Spider-Man verse or whatever you want to call it. I'm saying that because we have so many comic book movies coming out every year. There's a ton coming out. A ton came out this year. A ton will come out next year. And I think I feel like this movie's almost been slighted because it's in the theaters. If this was on like a Netflix, or if Sony had released this in a different way, I think we'd be speaking about it in a different way. The film was obviously fantastic, but its financial performance doesn't seem all that stellar to me. I don't think it's going to lose money. I just don't think it's going to make a big profit. And that's a problem, right, for Sony. If you're going to spend money, if you're going to spend $200 million, you're going to want to make $100 million in profit. That's just the way of the business. And so maybe they have some, like, they don't have a way to have this thing make $100 million in profit. It doesn't exist. It has to do well at the box office. It has to pop off. And then the value of that movie goes up and up as it goes up in box office returns. So this is not going to be $100 million profit movie. And I just think like if there's any red flag here from a business, it's a product conception. Why are you releasing an animated Spider-Man movie in December in the theaters and wide release theaters? It just doesn't add up to me. I'm glad they made the movie. I'm glad it's amazing, but I think there should have been a different distribution strategy for this film. Just because I think it's capped out what it could possibly do. You couldn't ask for a better movie or quality movie, and I think everybody who wants to see it has seen it. But that's not enough people to make this $100 million profit movie. And I think that's where I see the problem here. It's like, I think they should have made it. I think it's a really cool, awesome film, but it seems more like a direct to streaming situation. That's what it seems like to me. It may sell to Netflix or whoever, or Hulu or Amazon Prime. And people would really enjoy it. A lot of people would see it, and it would get people to retain their subscriptions on whatever streaming service. And that just seems like a better business path for this than what it's doing right now. It's not a disaster. It's not a flop. It's just not a huge win like I think that it should be. This should have been a huge win, especially because of the quality of the film. And it's not. And I think that's kind of on Sony in terms of how they release this film. Okay, so that was number 4. I don't think it's going to drop that much. I think it's going to continue to sort of peter on and make money. Maybe like a 30% drop next weekend. We'll see. Number 5, The Mule, 11.7 million, plus 24%. Clint Eastwood movies they're catnip for old people. Well, I've discussed this already. Like this, it's a win. You put a Clint Eastwood movie out, he's not going to be around that much longer. But you put them out in Christmas time, they're going to be great. $60 million so far in its third weekend. I wonder if they have a showdown for this one with this other Of course they don't have a showdown. Come on, Box Office Mojo. Let's see his other movies. I'm not like well versed in Clint Eastwood films. I've seen them all, but I don't know what they do financially. Sully did 125 total. American Sniper did 350 total. He's made a lot of movies. Gran Torino did 150 total. $1 Million Baby did $100 million. That was 14 years ago, though. So he's had a lot of wins. His movies tend to do about 30 to 50 million on average over the last decade. So this one's already past that. So I think it's, all things considered, it's a pretty good performance for this movie. And it's not a great film. It's not like people aren't gushing about it like they did American Sniper, or I think people were like Gran Torino too. It's not that high quality of a movie, but I think it's a recovery for him, because 1517 to Paris, which was a huge bust, it felt like, when it came out in February this year. This is his second film already this year. And critically, it was just totally maligned. So The Mule is a good turnaround for Clint Eastwood. I'm not sure how many more films he's going to direct. He's in his early 80s, or star in for that matter. I think he's probably going to hang up his saddle here pretty soon, but this is a really a strong performance for The Mule. Number 6 was Vice, 7.7 million for the weekend, $17 million so far. This one opened up on Christmas Day, so last Tuesday. So it's made $17 million so far. This one had a pretty high production budget of like 65 million. It's really hard to read when a movie opens up on Christmas what it's going to do, just because the numbers are all screwed up. 64% on Tomatoes, which is not great for, this is supposed to be a prestige film, a prestige awards film. It needs to be 80, 85%, 90% around Tomatoes. It's 64%. So critics didn't love it. 54% audience score. Again, hackable, right? Like, it could be right-wing people who just don't want a film that's critical of Dick Cheney. But the real tell here is the C+ cinema score, which is terrible. $60 million production budget. That's before marketing. Twice as expensive as Adam McKay's previous film, The Big Short. So Deadline says, hey, that's a big hole to climb out of. It's beating other awards contenders in terms of post-track scores. So that's surveys that are taken when people leave the theater. 3.5 stars on post-track, 49% definite recommend. That's higher than The Favorite, which was 2.5 stars, 37% definite recommend. I think The Favorite is being mismarketed. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard some buzz about it and people's reactions to it. It's being mismarketed. It's a little bit more raunchy than I think people are expecting when they walk into it. Mary Queen of Scots, 2.5 stars on post-track, 38% definite recommend. So it's doing better than those sort of awards contenders, but I'm not really that interested in that part of it. I'm interested in the financial box office performance here, and it's doing okay. The C+ is the kiss of death, though. This will not break out with mass audiences, because the word of mouth is going to be, hey, it's an interesting movie, but hey, it's not that great, or it's not really worth seeing. Now, it could play strong because of award stuff through January. We got the Oscar nominations right around the corner. I think voting happens over the next couple of weeks, and then I think we get nominations towards the mid to late part of January. So we are right in the heart of award season. So that might help with all those nominations that Christian Bale's going to get. It's got a product quality problem, though. Critics didn't love it. Audiences certainly don't love it. So I don't really see it breaking out all that much here. I saw it Christmas Eve night, I guess the preview night. That would have been Monday. Big Short is one of my favorite films. I think it is the kinetic style of Adam McKay in that movie, and the way that it explains the financial crisis. It's amazing. To me, it's a classic. It's an instant classic. But Adam McKay has such a specific style, and it doesn't work as well, I think, in Vice. Christian Bale's amazing in it. Amy Adams is phenomenal in it. The acting is really, Sam Rockwell is just a pitch perfect George W. Bush. Pitch perfect. The acting here is out of this world. The writing is a mess, and the narrative structure is a complete and utter, like a Pollock painting. It's just like, what are you doing? The time jumps, they don't really make a lot of sense. There's a surprisingly lack of emotion in the film. It starts out strong, and then quickly just becomes a mess. And so I just don't think, it's an old person's film. 78% of the crowd's over 25, or men over 25 was 41%. They seem to really like it a lot. They give it the best grade. Had a really high viral rate, 30-1, which is far ahead of the typical 14-1 for an indie drama. That's Adam McKay's style, right? He's like a pop indie director. That's what Big Short felt like. It felt like an indie film, especially how they played with time jumps and narrative. It was not a linear film, and neither is this at all. But I think where it worked with The Big Short, because it was such a recent event for everybody, in that like nobody understood what happened, but we were all affected by it, right? Everybody was affected by the Great Recession that happened in 2008, and nobody really understood it. I vaguely understood it, but that movie helped everybody understand a lot better what actually happened. With the Vice movie, I don't think I understand Dick Cheney any more at all than I did before. And I was a really big political junkie, and I followed everything back then, from 2000 until now. I've been a political junkie, so I knew a lot about Dick Cheney. Some of the stuff was interesting, but it almost, in a weird way, obfuscated him as a character more than it did illuminate him. And I think that's the problem with the film. So from a box office perspective, it's not going to connect, I think, very well. It's doing okay. It's not a flop, but I think it's definitely an underperformance. Annapurna's going to be in real trouble. Annapurna has not had a real hit in forever. This was supposed to be, a hit for them. They're going to make a lot of money off of it. That's not going to happen. So Annapurna is going to be they're already in financial trouble. I think they're in deeper financial trouble because this is not going to make them, $30-50 million of profit. So that's too bad. Speaking of, in terms of like overall Vice here, it's probably a fly out to left field. Maybe a single if it can keep the drops low over the next few weeks, but I don't see that happening. So it's definitely an underperformance and might be a little bit of a loss for Annapurna, who can't take another loss. So number 7 this weekend was Holmes and Watson, 7.3 million. This one opened up on Christmas Day. This is already a meme in terms of how terrible this movie is. So this was shot back in 2016, shelved for over 2 years. This was shot before Daddy's Home 2, which came out last Christmas, by the way. So, it's the reteaming of John C. Reilly and Will Ferrell. It's Step Brothers 2 kind of situation feeling to it. What ended up happening is that the movie's absolutely dreadful. 9% Rotten Tomatoes, 28% audience score. And those are both terrible scores, but the real standout to me is that cinema score. As much as cinema score is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I've talked about the weaknesses of cinema score 1,000 times on the show. It's not perfect, but it does, because it is the consistent same survey questions in the same way for the last 40 years. It does give us a very accurate read on that opening night crowd who sees it at 7:00, right? I know that in the 5 cities who do this survey, that this is what these people felt like, and they absolutely hated the film. D+ cinema score, 30% recommend in post-track exit. That's terrible. That D+ cinema score is one of the worst I have seen for a movie like this with 2 big stars. It's awful. Cost $42 million to make. They tried to sell it to Netflix. I made a comment on some board like, hey, maybe they should have sold this to Netflix. Someone's like, yeah, they did, and posted an article. So they couldn't even dump this on Netflix, which blows my mind, because I think this is a perfect movie for Netflix. Just buy this thing up and throw it out there. The test screenings were terrible. In terms of its performance, it's awful. Looking at $19 million in how many days it's been open, not even a week. It's not going to do well. And and rightly so. Like Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly were all over social media and the late night shows this week. And so you would expect this to pop off a little bit more. I thought it was going to do well. I'm trying to look back to my holiday score here, what I was going to give it. I said it's going to open. I thought it was going to do like $16 million total. That's not going to happen. Or I thought it was going to do $75 million total. Here's what I thought was going to happen. I thought it was going to pop off opening weekend and do like $30 million and then just completely collapse, because I knew the quality was shit. You could just tell by the trailers. So this is a disaster. It's a disaster for everybody involved. It should have never happened. Sony should have canned this film or 86'd it. Or what they should have done is go back to the drawing board, recut the thing, reshoot some of it, and then get it out on like Crackle or any streaming service. This shouldn't have been released in theaters. It's just not a good enough piece of work. As much as I am critical of the masses and the average moviegoer sometimes is like their taste, whatever, which is like a traditional. Everybody does that. Like they go to see Transformers. Everybody's an idiot. Blah blah blah. But you can't trick audiences that easily. And when you release something that it's not even necessarily about artistic quality, it's about product quality. If you sell somebody that they're going to get A and you give them F, they're going to be pissed. Look at The Witch. Look at It Comes at Night. Really mismarketed films. If you're selling Holmes and Watson as Step Brothers 2 and it's going to be funny and really enjoyable and it's boring and stupid, people are going to get super mad. It doesn't matter how the artistic quality because you mismarketed. You sold them a lemon essentially, and that's what happened with Holmes and Watson. People get pissed when you do that. And so that's what happened. Holmes and Watson's, I would just call it an absolute disaster. It's a disaster for Sony, a disaster for Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly. It really does tarnish both of their brands. More John C. Reilly than Will Ferrell. Will Ferrell will do whatever he wants. John C. Reilly is in a little bit of a spot where he does art films. He does a lot of different stuff. This really, I think, kind of hurts him a little bit more. In any event, number 7.3 million, Holmes and Watson, a huge disaster. Let's see. I'm like really over on time right now. I'm already pushing like almost 50 minutes. So I'm going to try and quickly go through this. Second act, doing $21 million in the second weekend. Pretty much what I thought it was going to do. Didn't really break out. Kind of a little bit of a flop. STX, they need more hits. STX and Annapurna, they're in trouble. They need better movies. Ralph Breaks the Internet was number 9 with $6.5 million. $175 million total so far. Pretty good. Cost a lot to make, though. I'll have to dive deeper on that one. I'm not sure how we're going to do, if that's like a home run or a triple or double on that. Probably more like a double. Number 10 was Dr. Seuss The Grinch. Minus 50%. This one's going to drop off the face of the earth now. Doesn't matter. It made $265 million domestically. One of the bigger surprises, I think, of the year, easily. $469 million worldwide. Okay, so that is the top 10. Stan and Ollie, speaking of John C. Reilly, terrible limited opening. 15K per theater in 5 theaters, going nowhere. On the basis of Sex, about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, with Felicity Jones starring. Opened up on 33 theaters, 20K per theater. Not super fantastic. Not the end of the world, though. I don't really have time to dive into limited stuff, so I'm not going to. I'll probably do a bit deeper dive on that once the Oscar noms come out. Welcome to Marwen, though, I do want to point out 7.7 million in its second weekend. Robert Zemeckis, my man. Okay, everybody called this was going to be a massive flop, right? Like, nobody's surprised by this. I am upset that Robert Zemeckis cannot get a good film made. His last breakout hit was Flight 6 years ago. So just a quick history. Robert Zemeckis, to me, I think, is one of the most unheralded filmmakers in America. I think he sits at a level, maybe not near Spielberg, but let me just go through these really quick. Romancing the Stone, whatever, pretty good, kind of a classic 80s film. All the Back to the Futures. Hoover and Roger Rabbit. Forrest Gump. Contact. What Lies Beneath, which is a classic. Castaway, which is a masterpiece. Polar Express, Christmas Carol, he gets into that stuff. Does Flight, which is a freaking amazing movie. Since Flight, The Walk, Allied, and now Welcome to Marwen are all flops. And he's going the Ron Howard route, where he cannot get a good film made that is hyped and touched off. So I think he's like sunsetting like Ron Howard is, which is so sad. I don't know why he decided to do Welcome to Marwen. It's a weird movie. Just pull anybody that the trailer's like, that's weird. That's like 90% of Americans, they say that trailer. That's a weird movie. What is that all about? Why are you releasing it during the holidays? I could go on and on and on. Deadline has a whole long story about how Welcome to Marwen's going to lose $60 million. Zemeckis is in trouble, man. That sucks. Steve Carell made a mistake going with that movie. It's a total disaster, even a bigger disaster than Holmes and Watson. But I don't want to do too much of deep dive on that one. Let's talk a little bit about what's coming out, and then we'll close out the show. This weekend's going to be super weird. It's the weekend after New Year's. Escape Room's coming out. That looks super fun. I have no idea what it's going to do. Maybe it opens up to like 15 to 20-ish, I think. It looks so fun. I mean, it's like, take the escape room thing. Isn't that like, wasn't The Cube like the original escape room movie, which is like from what, 15 years ago? I don't even remember. Then we're getting to January. January is one of the oddest months in film in the box office, because all these holiday movies are going to play strong mostly through January. And so the new stuff that comes out is usually trash. Escape Room is kind of like genre trash. The Upside, Replicas, A Dog's Way Home. I don't know anything about these movies. The big one in January is going to be Glass, though. It comes out January 18th. I expect it to open over 100 million easily. It's going to be probably the biggest opening ever in January. It's going to be massive and huge. It's really going to suck up all the air in January. The Kid Would Be King comes out, and then Serenity, which looks totally bonkers, and I so want to see it. Matthew McConaughey, Anne Hathaway, Jason Clarke. It looks, Diane Lane. It looks nuts. But it's going to do zero business. I can tell that right now. It will become a cult classic almost immediately. Okay, so that's mostly it. That's January. It's gonna be the holiday films playing strong through the whole month. With Glass, I think Glass will kind of shut the door on the holiday season. When Glass comes out, takes up all the theaters. It'll open on like 4,200 theaters. It'll suck all the air out of the holiday movies, and it might bring an end to the holiday season a lot quicker than we did last year. Maybe Mary Poppins won't play as strong because it's going to lose theaters to Glass on the 18th. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. I will be back next weekend. This has been the Wildline Podcast.